I'm sharing with you some stories that are really pre-Valley Baptist Church. I'll get to the start of Valley Baptist Church very soon, but I thought it might be helpful for you to understand how God first worked in Pastor Roger's life and in my life, preparing us, calling us, prepping us so that someday we could build a church like Valley Baptist Church or be a part of a wonderful church like Valley Baptist Church. And so this is another pre-story. In fact, this story is going to go back way back in history. But the first thing I want to remind you is that Pastor Roger and I both were farm boys. We both grew up on a farm in southwest Oklahoma. Both of our dads had very successful farming operations. Farmed a lot of land. Pastor Roger's dad did, my dad did too. Now, what that did was that kept us down home on the farm working. We learned how to be hard workers from the time we could just about walk. And both of our fathers raised wheat and alfalfa and cotton and cattle. Both families had a cow-calf operation, which you bring, every year you have a spring crop of calves. And then often in the winter, I know on my side of the house and my family, Dad would often have a stocker feeder business where we would bring in cattle, feed them out over the course of 3 or 4 months and send them to market and get the gain off of the weight that we put on them. So we worked hard on the farm, hauling hay. Roger and I have hauled a lot of hay. Chopping cotton, you chop the weeds out of the cotton. Both of our fathers had farmland that had irrigation. Not all of it was irrigation. So we grew up moving irrigation pipes back in those days, learning how to work hard. And I think that prepared us for ministry. It prepared us to learn. It prepared us that we had grit. In fact, he and I often would sit in our offices when we were maybe on a slow afternoon and say, this isn't anything like farming, is it? Well, no, farming was a lot harder. We would talk about the hard work in the summers out in the fields. We thought we had it easy being pastors. We still had a very strong work ethic. And we found out that a strong work ethic will help a church grow. If your pastors are moving and they're serving and they're building and they're growing, so will the congregation. So we're blessed. Both of us were blessed to be farmers, growing up in a farm family. And in both of our cases, as far back in history as we can find it, Pastor Roger and myself were both at the same time, we were the first to leave the farm in our families. So we're talking about a farm background that lasted way back, all the way back to the 1800s. I can tell you this story in just a minute. So we grew up in that similar kind of culture, similar kind of lifestyle, where every spring we were planting cotton and cutting wheat, and in the fall we're harvesting the cotton, and it was a cycle of life that we were used to and lived all the way up to the time that we felt that God was calling us into ministry and we're going to serve the Lord. Let me tell you about one of those stories that I think will be a particular blessing to you. When I began to understand my roots, I realized that my family, my grandparents on both sides of the house came from the state of Kentucky. In talking to Pastor Roger, as we grew a little older, he goes, so did my grandparents on both sides of the house. We came from the state of Kentucky. And so we began to talk about this and learn about it, where they came from, where we came from. And we realized that there was a crossing over point where our families lived together in the same county in early 1800s and about 1825. So one time I was in Kentucky, I wanted to go back to the old home place in Johnson County, Kentucky, and see where my Fairchild family had come from. That's the side of the house that lived in the same county where Pastor Rogers, the Spradlin family, came from. And I was invited to be a part of an old-fashioned cultural experience in the Appalachian Mountains where kinfolks come back in a family reunion, and then on a Sunday, you go to the cemetery and you hold your Sunday morning church service. So I was on my way to the Paddy Flat Cemetery where this old Baptist church was going to meet, and they had built a arbor made out of wood where you could get from underneath the shade. and you decorated the graves and you cleaned up the graves, and usually there were testimonies about people talking about their loved ones that had gone on before. Well, it just so happened that my fourth great grandpa, Abihud Fairchild, is the oldest grave in that cemetery, and there's many people in there that are Fairchilds. And so when we had the time of fellowship and them preaching and singing, then we had a time of food, and these ladies set a table like you wouldn't believe. And when I sit down at the table and I begin to tell them who I was and where I was from, I asked some of them, I said, have you ever heard of the Spradlin family? They said, well, yeah, we know all the Spradlin family. They're from right down the road. And by the way, that county is the very same county that Loretta Lynn, the country music singer, comes from. Her last name was actually Loretta Lynn Webb, and there were many Webb people there that day at that cemetery. And I didn't run into any Spradlins at that particular juncture. But they told me about a church called Jenny's Creek Baptist Church. It started in 1825. I went down there and went to that church and found out a little bit more about it. That church was started by James Spradlin, that's be Pastor Roger's ancestor, and Asa Fairchild, my ancestor. So we discovered that our ancestors had started a church together in Kentucky in 1825. Isn't it something to see and understand how God can work things together, that the eventual church that we know and love here at Valley Baptist Church, something was happening in the Appalachian Mountains long, long ago that was setting the path for this to take place. So it's amazing to think about how God was doing a work in 1825 where the neighbor's family and the Spradlin family were working together to plant a church. Those two families eventually migrated out from the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky all the way to the prairie lands of southwest Oklahoma and began their farming careers. And so that's why Pastor Roger and I grew up together about 5 miles apart. Now let me tell you about when I think Valley Baptist Church was born. When we were out of high school and doing our ministry, it was through counseling and guidance, we were recommended to go to Oklahoma Baptist University. And so that's exactly what we did. While we were at Oklahoma Baptist University, Pastor Roger met a young gal named Ginger East. And of course, you probably know the rest of that story. They were soon wed and moved back to Bakersfield. But I want to tell you about when I think Valley Baptist Church was actually born. Now, on our plaques around here, we'll say something to the effect that Valley Baptist Church began in December, the first Sunday of December, 1985. And that's true. That's when the church started. But let me tell you when I think the church really started. So Roger and Ginger were going to move back to California. I was still in Oklahoma serving at another church, where, by the way, I met a young gal named Cindy. And I wound up marrying her. And so Roger and I were staying in close communication about his departure to California. He was going to come out here and become work with college students here in Bakersfield, Cal State and BC. And so I said, okay, well, let me come see you one last time. And so once again, it seems like we did everything about midnight. So I didn't get to his house until late, about 11 o'clock. And what we decided to do was just take a walk. And we're out in the country, 10 miles from any town. And it's where we grew up. So we just started walking east from his house about a half a mile. We got to the half-mile point where there's a four-way corner. And to the right, one of my relatives, a man by the name of Gorman Sewell, who also came from Kentucky. His family came from Kentucky with my family, the neighbor's family. We walked out into his cotton patch. The cotton was up to about our knees. It was probably July, maybe 1st of August. And it was a good looking cotton crop. And we just were walking out through there. And we were talking about what was going to happen in California and where's the future going to be. And finally, and there was a bright moon in the east, beautiful moon. And Pastor Roger said, I think we need to pray. And I said, okay. And Roger fell down on his face in that cotton row, face, feet to the ground. And at first I was taken back just a little bit. I'd never seen him do anything like that. And I knelt beside him, and there was a cotton row between us. And I have never heard him pray like that before. He poured out his heart to God in passion and intensity, in a way in which I would sit there amazed. I thought, man, my friend here is talking to God like I've never heard him talk to the Lord before. And it wasn't a little bitty short prayer. And we got up after praying, walked back to the house. He went on to California, and I stayed in Oklahoma for the next 3 or 4 years. And we would re-meet again in seminary. But many a time I've thought, that's where Valley Baptist Church was born. That night in my cousin Gorman Sewell's cotton patch, when Pastor Roger was pouring out his heart to God to do something big in our lives and in his life. I think, to me, we had the connection of Kentucky, all of those things. That was all leading up to it. But to me, there was something special about that night in the cotton patch when Valley Baptist Church was born.